Tonight at 10, the remaining COVID restrictions in England are set to be lifted at the end of this month, 4 weeks earlier than planned. It would end 2 years of regulations, including self-isolation for anyone testing positive.
It is my expectation that we will be able to end the last domestic restrictions, including the legal requirement to self-isolate if you test positive, a full month early.
But the announcement of the changes was far from being a well-thought-out strategy, according to Labour.
Some throwaway remarks at the start of Prime Minister's questions were more about digging the Prime Minister out of a political hole than dealing with the serious challenge facing the country.
During the day, another image emerges of a gathering in Downing Street during lockdown. Police say that they'll now review the decision not to investigate that event, and they also say they'll be sending questionnaires to more than 50 people about the lockdown parties. Also tonight, the West Ham player filmed kicking his cat is said to be extremely remorseful. The RSPCA has now seized 2 cats from his home. A man who murdered his fiancée in 2016 has now been convicted of killing his wife 6 years earlier. And a discovery in a French cave shows that the modern human arrived in Europe thousands of years earlier than previously thought.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News Channel, looking to win the Club World Cup for the first time in their history, Romelu Lukaku helps Chelsea into the final.
Good evening. The remaining COVID restrictions in England are now set to be lifted at the end of this month, 4 weeks earlier than previously planned. The shortened timescale was announced by Boris Johnson, who said it all depended on the current downward trend continuing, but he fully expected that to be the case. It would end the rule that anyone testing positive for COVID or showing symptoms should self-isolate. The Prime Minister also said he intended to set out a new strategy for living with COVID within weeks. But scientists have warned that the disease still poses a real risk, especially to the vulnerable and to the unvaccinated. Our health editor, Huw has more details.
It's another big step in the journey from life in the pandemic to something like normality. The final restrictions in England lifted, including the ending of the legal requirement to isolate after a positive test, perhaps as soon as February the 21st.
Have you done enough to save your leadership, Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister headed to the Commons to make the announcement, with an eye perhaps to cheering up his backbench MPs, pulling forward the ending of restrictions which had been planned for late March.
Provided the current encouraging trends in the data continue, it is my expectation that we will be able to end the last domestic restrictions, including the legal requirement to self-isolate if you test positive, a full month early, Mr. Speaker.
Later, Labour gave their reaction.
The fact we had no notice this was coming, no sense it was coming, suggests that some throwaway remarks at the start of Prime Minister's questions were more about digging the Prime Minister out of a political hole than dealing with the serious challenge facing the country.
In Manchester, where daily case rates have been coming down, people we spoke to seemed positive about the ending of COVID restrictions.
If you're going to get it, you're going to get it. It's as simple as that. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it.
I think everyone's sort of got to a stage where we know the risk and we have to get on with the rest of our lives.
I love that we've got a lot of our freedom back and I want to, enjoy that. But at the same time, it's important to be cautious, I think, still.
The Office for National Statistics survey suggests that 3.3 million people in the UK had the virus last week, up a bit on the previous week. Case rates varied around the UK. Wales was the only nation to see a decrease. But hospital admissions have been falling, with the Omicron variant proving less severe than first anticipated and the continued take-up of booster jabs.
I don't think this is a scientific decision, though. I think it's clear that the rates are still very, very high, particularly in some sectors of the community, particularly in children, in people who look after children, their parents, in other words, and teachers.
Another scientist said the decision was on balance reasonable, though he had concerns about the vulnerable, like Rachel, who's not happy about the news and says she's much more likely to stay indoors. She had a kidney transplant and her immune system is compromised. She's worried about picking up the virus from her family.
I know that they will carry on to protect themselves and do tests if they can get them. But you don't know who they're mixing with and who they're stood next to in supermarkets. And the paranoia that I had, I can feel that starting to come again, because who can I trust?
While England heads towards life without restrictions, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are moving at different speeds. They'll publish their own plans in due course on life with COVID. Huw Pym, BBC News.
Well, earlier this evening, detectives investigating alleged breaches of COVID regulations in Downing Street and in Whitehall, they said that they'll begin making contact with more than 50 people by the end of the week to get their versions of events. Let's turn to our political correspondent, Damien Grammaticus at Westminster. And the police are saying that they are continuing investigations at a pace, Damien. What's your take on what's been happening today?
Yes, that's right, Hugh. Well, this, I think, is a significant development. This is the Metropolitan Police's special inquiry team who say they have identified more than 50 individuals who they believe took part in those parties, events in Downing Street and Whitehall. They are each going to be sent a letter with a legal questionnaire, being told they have to answer truthfully and within 7 days. And they are investigating, remember, 12 parties. We know that Boris Johnson was at least a couple of those, so it's likely he may be among the recipients of this. And what the police say is that anyone who they believe has breached COVID regulations without reasonable excuse will face a fixed penalty notice. So that is a significant development. At the same time, police now are also looking at another party. Now, this is because a picture that emerged today. It was published by the Mirror. It was an event that we knew about, a Zoom quiz party, but in the picture you see Boris Johnson, 3 of his staff. One has some tinsel, one has a party hat, and on the side, on the right-hand side of that picture, you can see what is a bottle, an open bottle of sparkling wine. So police are now considering whether to add this to their list as well. Downing Street always said the Prime Minister dropped by to that event. That came as Boris Johnson was announcing his intention to lift restrictions to the Commons, and I think what it shows is that for all of his perhaps intention to rally his MPs and show he's moving things on, these revelations and these investigations mean the political problems for him endure.
Damien, many thanks again for the latest there at Westminster tonight. Damien Grammaticus. The RSPCA says it seized 2 cats belonging to the West Ham footballer Kurt Zouma after footage was posted on social media showing him kicking and hitting one of the cats. The player has been fined 2 weeks' wages by the club, and the sportswear firm Adidas has ended its deal with the player. One of West Ham's sponsors has also suspended its contract with the club. West Ham says that Zouma is extremely remorseful about his actions. Our sports correspondent Natalie Perks reports now.
It baffles me, the decision to play him.
This is such a serious case of animal cruelty.
It was a man kicking and slapping a defenceless, fragile animal.
The chorus of condemnation grows ever louder. Fans in the London Stadium made their feelings known from the moment Kurt Zouma touched the ball last night. But with the defender playing, West Ham won the match and kept a clean sheet.
I'm a human being and I'm also a great animal lover, so I understand how people feel. But again, as I said, I'm the football manager here and I have to find a way of getting the results here. And Kurt Zouma's one of the key players to us.
The video, which we've decided not to fully show, is upsetting. Zouma can be seen kicking his cat across the kitchen while his brother films laughing. Zouma also slaps the cat in the face in front of one of his children. The player has since apologised.
Last night is far from the first time that football's moral compass has been tested. West Ham today says that Kurt Zouma has been fined the maximum amount they can, that's 2 weeks' wages, and the money's been given to animal charities. They also say that he is fully cooperating with the RSPCA, who now have his 2 cats.
But that's not enough for some. Zouma has been dropped by his personal boot sponsor Adidas, and the health insurance firm Vitality says it's hugely disappointed by the judgment shown by West Ham, and it suspended sponsorship of the club with immediate effect.
Footballers are commodities that can be bought and sold, so therefore that has to be taken into consideration. Ultimately, this is a non-football matter, and if Kurt Zouma was a lorry driver or carpet fitter or an architect, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
The French international learned swiftly that this is a nation of animal lovers. Former footballer Ian Wright called Zuma a coward. Gary Lineker called West Ham's decision to play him tone deaf. And wildlife presenter Chris Packham said animal abuse must never be sidelined at the expense of entertainment. It seems West Ham fans agree.
Everyone expected him not to be in the team, in the squad, in the stadium for last night's game. And when the starting 11 was announced an hour before the game and he was there was a lot of shock. And, you know, it brings the club into more disrepute.
Essex Police says it's investigating and working with the RSPCA. Zuma's cats have been taken to the vets and will remain in RSPCA care while the investigation continues. Natalie Perks, BBC News.
The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has cast further doubt on the future of the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick. He says she has days and weeks to show him that she can tackle problems within the force and to restore public trust. The comments follow a highly critical report which found evidence of racism, sexism and misogyny in parts of the force. The Met has apologised, but 9 out of the 12 officers involved in sending offensive messages are still in the force. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports now.
It's been nearly a year. The devastating murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer was a crisis for the Met.
We have been rocked.
Then, week after week, with accusation after accusation, a picture emerged of a police force with a culture problem, headed by a commissioner some believe can't fix it.
Racism, misogyny.
Now, the Mayor of London has ramped up the pressure.
My expectation is the next time I see her, I want to see what her response is to the examples, not of one officer, of 14 officers being involved in racist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic and the like behaviour. And secondly, what her plans are to win back the trust and confidence that's been both knocked and shattered as a consequence.
Appalling behaviour recently revealed at Charing Cross Police Station appears to have pushed the Mayor into demanding quicker change. He wants answers, he said there, the next time he sees the Commissioner. And here they are feeling the pressure. I'm told there was a meeting last week between Dame Cressida Dick and the Mayor of London. The Met's plans for a review were discussed. And Sadiq Khan's reaction? We can't wait for your review. We need urgent, wide-ranging action. But can change happen in weeks? The Met's review will take all year. Perhaps it starts with mid-ranking officers. Leroy Logan used to be one. He says it's about dealing with toxic attitudes openly expressed.
They put it on social media, WhatsApp groups, and it's spread, and that's how it's been picked up. I'm not hearing supervisors coming out and saying, we caught this person, we dealt with them.
The Commissioner is the force's ethical leader, appointed by the Home Secretary. But if the Mayor no longer backed her, she'd almost certainly have to go. Tom Simons, BBC News, at New Scotland Yard.
A man who's already serving a life sentence for murdering his fiancée in 2016 has been told he'll never be freed after being found guilty of murdering his wife 6 years earlier. When Ian Stewart was sentenced for killing his fiancée, the author Helen Bailey, police began investigating the death of his wife, Diane Stewart, and found new evidence, as our correspondent Joe Black tells us.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of the murder of your late wife, Diane
You're joking?
Stewart, on Friday.
This is the moment serving prisoner Ian Stewart is taken from jail so he can be arrested and questioned for another crime, murdering his wife, Diane.
Have you got nothing better to do than make
We
things
can
up?
discuss this at Thorpwood Police Station.
She died back in 2010, and Stewart was able to fool medical professionals by suggesting she died during the course of an epileptic fit. Because he went undetected, he then went on to murder another woman in 2016. The body of his fiancée, the author Helen Bailey, was discovered in a cesspit. It was this crime that made detectives re-examine Diane Stewart's death here in Bassingbourn.
Ian Stewart said that he went to the supermarket, and when he returned to the family home here, he said he found his wife had collapsed in the garden.
Right, OK, tell me exactly what's happened. My wife's had a fit. I think she's in the garden.
In this 999 call, he describes finding his wife not breathing and unresponsive. He's told to try and resuscitate her.
1, 2, 1, 2. Right, is that fast enough?
Diane Stewart took regular medication for epilepsy and hadn't had a fit for nearly 20 years. Her body was cremated, but she donated her brain to medical research. Years later, that brain tissue would become crucial evidence in this trial, with some scientists suggesting her death was caused by a prolonged restriction of her breathing from an outside source.
Without that, we wouldn't have been able to secure a conviction. And yes, I was very pleased that we were able to take that away and do further examination.
In police interviews, Ian Stewart refused to answer any questions about his wife's death. The court heard he inherited £96,000 from Diane Stewart's estate, and 2 years later he met the author Helen Bailey on a bereavement website. They planned to get married, but in 2016 he secretly drugged her, suffocated her, dumped her body in a pit below their garage in a plot to inherit her fortune. Ian Stewart has been described as manipulating, controlling and a narcissist. A man we now know was a danger to the women he formed relationships with. Joe Black, BBC News.
The peace agreement that binds together Bosnia-Herzegovina is under growing threat. We have a special report tonight on a part of Europe that experienced immense suffering during the conflict of the 1990s. Bosnia was devastated during that war, which followed the disintegration of the state of Yugoslavia. Tens of thousands of people were killed. Hundreds of thousands were driven from their homes in a process of ethnic cleansing, and rape was widely used as a weapon of war. An international deal ended the fighting in 1995, but the tensions have continued. Now, the Dayton Accords split Bosnia into two regions, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Bosnian Serb Republic. Since then, during years of economic stagnation, corruption and political turmoil, leaders on all sides have used the divisions of the past to cling to power. But now the Bosnian Serb leader, Milorad Dodik, is threatening to break up the state, denying well-established evidence that his side committed genocide during the war of the 1990s. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen reported on the Bosnian War, and in this extended report he's returned to see how the present is still haunted by the past.
The war left open wounds on every side in Bosnia. Srebrenica's genocide is the deepest. More than 8,000 men and boys, Bosniak Muslims, were massacred in a few days in July 1995 by Serb soldiers. On her 73rd birthday, Mera Jogas went to the graves of her sons Omar and Munib in the cemetery where more than 6,000 of the genocide's victims are buried. Mrs. Jogas says she wants reconciliation, but the local Serbs scare her.
They make a lot of noise. They want to provoke fear. Sometimes I'm afraid to spend the night in my house, but I have to. I have nowhere else to go.
Most of the world accepts genocide happened here, but Srebrenica is in Republika Srpska, where denial of that genocide is in the political mainstream. In 1995, Dutch UN troops could not protect terrified Bosniak civilians who'd crowded into these concrete sheds at their base. They stood aside as Serb forces separated the men and the boys from the women and took them away to kill them.
The genocide in Srebrenica was also the culmination of a catastrophic failure by the outside world to stop the war, to end the killing in Bosnia. And you can understand, if you come to a place like this, why people are nervous again about the prospects of those old forces of nationalism and ethnic hatred being weaponized by unscrupulous politicians.
This is Milorad Dodik, the Bosnian Serb leader. In January, he led a parade through Banja Luka, his capital. He's talking about turning these paramilitary police into a Bosnian Serb army. It's part of a series of threats Dodik has made to separate from the rest of Bosnia since he rejected a new law banning genocide denial. In Bosnia, many people suspect leaders of all sides play on fears of new violence to secure their own power. That's dangerous in a fragile country where war leaders are still heroes. Serb nationalists venerate General Ratko Mladic, now serving life for genocide. Dodik wouldn't meet the BBC, so we spoke to disabled Serb war veterans in Banja Luka. They wanted reconciliation. For them, that means acceptance that they were also victims, unfairly condemned for fighting for their families and their old commander.
Ratko Mladic is sentenced. He's in jail, but he is still our hero. I don't understand why they can't just accept this. They say it's only Serbs who committed genocide in this country, no one else. It's only the Serbs who are killing people. We are not that kind of people.
If politicians fail to get an agreement, it will be ordinary people again who will feel the pain. And if a war does happen, the people will never come back from it. We didn't come back from the last one.
Bosnia's economy never recovered, and every piece of war damage connects to someone's nightmare. Shrapnel hit these homes in besieged Sarajevo on a snowy Saturday in 1994, after a brief ceasefire tempted children out to play. I arrived after shells from the Serb side killed 6 of them.
The children were killed at about 1:30 on a housing estate less than a mile from the front line.
The past holds the present hostage, not just the survivors who bear physical scars, but a country's mental trauma. One positive, today's parents don't want to put their children through a repeat of their own suffering. Every anniversary, they commemorate the children who were killed in the snow. It's never easy. This year, the talk of new violence made it worse. Esad Subasic's 7-year-old son, Admir, died in his arms.
Now Dodik claims there was no genocide. None of it happened. That should stop. They should put in sanctions. He's trying to fool the entire world.
Half of Bosnia has moved out, no matter if they are Bosniak, Croat or Serb. Everything's empty. And not just because of money. It's injustice, unfairness.
Young people on all sides in Bosnia want more than graves and memories. Their leaders have failed to create a better present and future. Sinking back into the past should be unthinkable. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Sarajevo.
The past and the present in Bosnia. That was Jeremy Bowen there, retracing some of the steps of the 1990s. Now, the Charity Commission is looking into the accounts of the foundation set up by the family of the World War II veteran Captain Sir Tom Moore. Accounts published by the Captain Tom Foundation show that in its first year, it spent more than £200,000 on running costs and on consultants. It gave out £160,000 to charities in grants. The Commission started looking at the foundation almost a year ago. The foundation says it's working closely with the regulator and welcomes its input. Scientists in Oxfordshire say that they've made a major breakthrough in their quest to develop practical nuclear fusion. That's the energy process that powers the stars. Researchers broke their own world record for the amount of energy extracted by squeezing together 2 forms of hydrogen. They hope that in future, this fusion will be able to provide a reliable source of low-carbon power. A discovery in a cave in France shows that the modern human arrived in Europe some 12,000 years earlier than previously thought. In a paper published in the journal Science Advances, researchers described finding fossilized remains of Homo sapiens, the species to which all modern human beings belong, alongside those of Neanderthals, an extinct species of archaic humans whose disappearance remains a hotly debated issue. Our science correspondent Pallav Ghosh picks up the story.
Sifting through ancient remains, archaeologists have been scrabbling in the French summer heat looking for clues to our own history. And they've discovered that the very first modern humans to have arrived in Western Europe came thousands of years earlier than previously thought.
We are now able to demonstrate that Homo sapiens arrived 12,000 years before expected, and this population were then replaced after that by other Neanderthal populations, and this rewrite literally all our books of history.
Neanderthals had been living in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. The current theory is that Homo sapiens arrived from Africa around 42,000 years ago, and shortly after that the Neanderthals went extinct. But now it appears that some of our species arrived 54,000 years ago. That's thousands of years earlier, and it means both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals may have lived on the same continent for much, much longer than previously thought, before modern humans eventually gained the upper hand. Scientists have been studying fossils for more than 100 years to find out why Neanderthals went extinct and we survived. Until now, the view was that we came along and quickly overwhelmed them. But the new evidence suggests that the two species lived in Europe for thousands of years, suggesting that the relationship wasn't that brutal, and there were more complex reasons for why the Neanderthals died out.
Well, the Neanderthals got these typical Neanderthal features, a longer, lower brain case, big brow ridge over the eyes.
The interaction of the two species, published in the journal Science Advances, are an important part of our own history.
It wasn't an overnight takeover by modern humans. So in some cases Neanderthals had the advantage, at other times modern humans had the advantage. So it was more finely balanced.
Was there a single thing that our species had that meant that the Neanderthals didn't survive?
We don't know the answer, but I think it's organisational, probably more than anything, that we were networking better, our social groups were larger, we were storing knowledge better, and we built on that knowledge more effectively than the Neanderthals were doing.
The discovery that the two species could have coexisted for thousands of years means that scientists will have to develop new theories for why Neanderthals died out and our kind survived. Palab Ghosh, BBC News.
That's it from us. Now BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.